Hello, my name is Nicolas Luchsinger. I work for Van Cleef and Arpels, and I'm happy to welcome you today at L'École in Hong Kong, the School of Jewelry Art supported by Van Cleef and Arpels. Here I am in the middle of the Lacloche exhibition and surrounded by masterpieces. I wanted to thank Laurence Mouy-Farin, the curator, who helped us to gather all these extraordinary pieces here. We'll speak more about them, and I'm looking forward to tell you the fascinating story of the dynasty of Lacloche.
This exhibition dedicated to Lacloche family, 70 years of high jewelry creation, is an exhibition that will really help you to journey through Paris during the 20th century, but also to discover creations and art movement from 1900 to 1930 to 1950s and then after the Second World War. The exhibition and the family would really be famous for the Art Deco creation. This exhibition has been possible thanks to the academic work of a very beautiful book that really revived a long-forgotten jeweler family. Nowadays, this exhibition is contributing to revive a landmark in French jeweler families. Shall we go together and discover more? Welcome, dear all. We are in the middle of the exhibition space, Nicolas and myself. We are very happy to be with you now. Before we start, let me go for some housekeeping details. So the whole conversation for about an hour will actually take place in English and there would be no translation. But moderation would happen in English simultaneously, so our colleagues would be able to answer your questions and get you further details if necessary. Then, at the end of this conversation, Nicolas and myself would be very happy to answer the Q&A sessions and to be as much as we can to be able to answer your many questions I'm sure you would have. So now let's go further and let's journey through Lacloche family. What we wanted to do now for this very kind of conversation, we wanted to emphasize a chronological view of the different generations within the Lacloche family. Lacloche being long forgotten now and only known by a few jewels experts, we wanted to paint back the kind of decor. So we will actually journey, the first chapter would be actually through the family and where in Paris. Why would they choose Paris? How does it all work? So this would be our introduction, and we will see that before they take a big flagship shop, they would actually be able to already start business in Paris, even though they are not originally from Paris. Then the second chapter would be about the very brand, the Lacloche brothers, because they are all siblings working for the same cause, how they are going to launch this Lacloche Frère brand, lasting from 1901 to 1931 on Rue de la Paix. Then the new generation, a kind of third generation comes out, and it's really 1936, 1967, Jacques Jr. really taking a new kind of, the business to a new kind of level. And finally, Nicolas and myself are gonna discuss, is there a Lacloche style? Is there something we can point out when one looks at Lacloche pieces? Let's go first into the background. Let's brush the background of the Parisian and Place Vendôme setting in 1900s. What is interesting to say and to notice, the Lacloche family originally comes from Maastricht and then from Belgium. So they are French speaking, but they are not originally French. They would eventually take French nationality and come to France. The whole thing works in actually a kind of sad event. The father, Lacloche, Mr. Lacloche, would actually was a street vendor, and at the age of 42 passed away, leaving a widow and 6 children. Those 6 children would be the ones creating the Lacloche dynasty. Their names, so there would be actually Leopold and Fernand, Jules and Jacques. Fernand and Jacques are actually the younger ones. And then come two ladies, two girls, Émilie and Bertha. So this is really their mothers, Rosalie, pushing those 6 children to venture to the new world, to venture to Europe and to create new businesses. So it's a very tiger mom, basically, giving its 6 children all the possible encouragement to start business. And the 2 elder brothers, meaning Leopold and Jules, they will actually head to Paris. And this is where we are now, 1900. Why going to Paris in 1900 when you want to start a jeweler business? Well, it's the place to be for artists, for luxury brands. It's really where everything will happen. So here we show you how the Parisian landscape would look in specifically the year 1900, when the World Fair, the very famous World Fair of 1900, celebrating the turn of the century, would actually take place. The Eiffel Tower is already there, as you know, it's been actually launched in 1889. And then along the bank of the river, the Seine, you would really see a lot of pop-up pavilions with 83,000 exhibitors showing innovation, machine engines, all under the kind of patronage of electricity, giving Paris this very nickname, the City of Light. And we can imagine that some of the 6 children, especially the elder brothers, might get some tickets and actually go and venture to the 1900 World Fair. And what they would have especially seen in the Grand and Petit Palais would actually be a lot of luxury, goldsmithing, and jewelry. So under really the spell of Lalique. So it's a lot about Art Nouveau, it's a lot about new creations. And they already started business in Paris in 1892. So they must have feel the kind of wind trends that would happen in Paris at that time. So it's the key place to be. It's very good to be there. But then let's go to the Place Vendôme area. For those of you who are lucky enough to have been there, spending holidays, you know how nice it is to walk around. So we show you here a bird-eye view. I'm sure you can see the square, which is actually Place Vendôme, a square that was built in the 18th century. And along or all around, we have a kind of golden kind of promenade. This is where you can really walk and stroll from Place Vendôme to Rue Royale, following actually the Rue Saint-Honoré. And then you can go to the Champs-Élysées if you want to be seen. You can also go to the Madeleine Church. And then, of course, from Place Vendôme, you can also go to Opéra, which is 5 minutes walk away. And in that very kind of triangle, that golden triangle, which is kind of the Mayfair of London or central Hong Kong, it's really where luxury shopping, entertainment, social kind of high-end social evening would happen. And so really, Rue de la Paix, Place Vendôme will slowly gather a lot of key figures for the luxury world. So it's the place you parade and be reminded that Hermès, the saddle, luxury saddle and horse equipment store, is just on the Rue Saint-Honoré next to the Madeleine Church. And from that, you would have equipped your horses perfectly, and then you can go on your carriage and go on the Champs-Élysées to see everybody and to be seen as the new fashionable kind of couple, lady, or bachelor. So this is in that context we are going to go, and we can imagine the Lacloche brothers looking at those streets, dreaming one day we will be there, right? What is happening on Rue de la Paix, Nicolas? What is so important there?
Rue de la Paix, as you show it, is very close to the Place Vendôme. And the Place Vendôme is really the heart of luxury and the heart of the jewelry stores. That's why. It's because also something happened on Place Vendôme is the opening of the Ritz. So the Ritz is one of the best hotels in the world, opened by César Ritz, a Swiss hotelier, who really wanted to offer the best to its client. So as you say, I mean, Paris is really the capital. It's where you come from all over the world to have fun. You have to imagine that at the time, there was like the Tsar in Russia, there was obviously the monarchy in England, but as well in Germany, in Austria, and they all wanted to go to Paris, as you say, the gay Paris. It has this reputation of luxury, it has this reputation of fun. And the reputation from luxury comes from Napoleon III, because he really wanted to have all the best industry in Paris, and he really supported a lot. And obviously his wife, Eugénie, was a big jewelry
and fashionista.
And luxury, exactly, consumers. So yes, it's the Ritz Hotel. So every wealthy international clients were staying at the Ritz, and the stores had to be close to them, so they can, as you say, stroll and shop. I mean, the first jewelers on the Place Vendôme was a Chaumet, but he was a salon, and then a Boucheron, something new. He opened a store at the street level, because before, to buy jewelry was a little bit formal. You had to make an appointment, you were shown the jewelry, and then the stores were at the street level. You can just push the door and buy jewelry. And then all the others followed. So Place Vendôme and Rue de la Paix is next door. Rue de la Paix is the same as Place Vendôme, but it's also a mix of different maisons, which makes it even more interesting. There is fashion, there is worth, there is Poiret, there is perfume, there is Guerlain, and obviously there is the king of the jewelers of the king, there is Cartier, 13 Rue de la Paix. And also what is interesting is that all these families are kind of mixed. If you take like Cartier, the three children of Alfred Cartier, they married the daughters of Worth, so they were kind of a mix, and they could do a business together, and the same would happen to Lacloche. So it's really why in Paris, Lacloche decided to open their store on the Rue de la Paix, which was the address and in fact the symbol of success.
We can see here on the slides, you can see all the kind of facade with the big brands written with Miller. We can see Cartier at the corner on the central picture, and we can guess Lacloche on the very left corner in this central picture. And underneath, you really see the panoramic view a bit later with Cartier, Lacloche, and Paul Ducharnay, which is also and Guerlain. So it's really all fashion and jeweler together. How convenient! So you can really shop for your gowns and then accessorize it perfectly.
Because the Lacloche didn't start in Paris.
No, indeed. Lacloche, originally, they have their office in Paris, and not at all on Place Vendôme, but actually in northern part of Paris. But where they would really start would be actually Belgium and Spain. And they really follow the aristocracy on their seaside resorts. So what is interesting is before they establish a shop on Rue de la Paix, they would really have nice little boutiques in different places. And as you can see here with the Lacloche and Company, we have Lacloche Frères, which is the very famous brand, but they also did a lot of business partnership with their in-laws, with their other families, and Nicolas will tell us more about it later. But here, if you look on the right-hand side, for those of you reading French, what is interesting is this is a kind of advertisement. We can see Lacloche and Company. And what is interesting is above it, it's saying spécialité pour corbeille de mariage. Just like Boucheron, they really brand themselves as specialized for wedding gifts. And they started with really selecting beautiful objects made in Paris, and they sell them in those different boutiques away from Paris, actually. And what is interesting is it's not just jewels, it's also cane handles, frames, little pendulettes or desk clocks. It's a lot of other things, really anything, even umbrellas. They also, and we will see, they have some kind of family connection with the lace business, so they would also go for precious embroideries. So, and what I like about this right-hand side advertising, it's also saying that they are fabricants joailliers, jeweler and makers. So they really select, they are working with the workshops. On the left-hand side, what you can see is even before 1900 and the big boom of Lalique in 1895, they would already sense the kind of new fancy designers, and they will buy drawings signed by René Lalique. So the way the Lacloche brothers are really working is really, again, they select the pieces from a portfolio in Paris. They don't have their own workshop, they don't have their own manpower, but they really have an eye for trends and very subtle, elegant pieces, as this really necklace, which is with kind of the whiplash curves from the Art Nouveau, but still all diamond and platinum. There is something very beautiful and elegant about it. So it's really like something that started the south of Europe and actually the seaside resorts around the Mediterranean area. And eventually, an event, again, a family event, would take place and speed up the process to actually conquer the kind of Place Vendôme market. In 1900, what is kind of tragic, the four brothers divided up the market. So I told you the two elder brothers went to Paris, but the two younger ones were actually encouraged to venture to the New World and eventually to Spain. And they opened, again, a boutique in Spain. And here on the right side corner, you can see another boutique and picture they had in Biarritz. But eventually in November 1900, the very younger brother, Jacques, was the victim of a train accident where he actually lost his life. So leaving a widow pregnant with a very, very, very early pregnancy, the baby would actually be born 8 months later, and he would be named Jacques. On this picture, what is really important is you see four men, but actually the three men in suit are the three brothers. The man at the back with the apron is one of their workers. And so there is one family member missing. And this event would really speed up the younger brothers and the only one remaining, basically Fernand, to decide to go to Paris and join the others. So this is an interesting, sad tragedy, but that would really be a key decision maker to select a flagship shop. And where would they take the flagship shop? 15 Rue de la Paix, Cartier is 13, as Nicolas told us, and Guerlain is just next door. What is also kind of interesting, right away, the central kind of engraving you can see, or poster, Lacloche Frères, 15 Rue de la Paix, Paris, is also showing you the very next shops or the very next places they're going to start business with: New York, London, Deauville, Cannes. So what is interesting, 1901, Rue de la Paix, and then already start away, 1904, they would get premises on New Bond Street, which is the place to be in London. And then eventually New York, but we will go back to that later. So this advertising is dating 1914. So in kind of 10 years, they would really conquer the market and be where every important jeweler would be, even though, again, they were not from a jeweler family. So they must have worked very hard, actually. What is maybe interesting is, how does it all work, the family connection? Can we go a bit further for that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what also is interesting as a picture you saw before, it's when you looked carefully at the window of the store, you could see it was like written by appointment to His Majesty the Queen of Greece. So obviously they already have a very fancy, very royal clientele. And how did they acquire that? So yes, it's a family of 6 children, as you said. You spoke a lot about the brothers, and let's speak a little bit about the sisters as well. So there are 2 sisters. Again, as I said, is to develop a business, you must also marry into families who can support and help you. So the 2 sisters are married well. One married a jewelers, and they opened a store in Buenos Aires, because Buenos Aires was in fact the capital, the Paris of South America. Argentina was in the wealthiest country between World War I and World War II, and there was a lot of money, a lot of potential jewelry buyers. So there is a branch in Buenos Aires. And then the other sister married lace makers, and they had a store in Spain. And through this store, with very fancy laces, they attracted the attention of the Queen of Spain. So the Queen of Spain, the wife of Alphonse XIII, Victoria Eugenia Battenberg, became a client of the sisters and then jumped to the brother and started to buy jewelry there. So Eugenia Victoria, her last name, maiden name was Battenberg. In fact, Battenberg was a German name. It was a princessly family, a morganatic princessly family, but quite famous because a branch of the family moved to England and they had to change their name because obviously of the German sounding, and after World War I, you couldn't really have a German sounding name in England, and they were named Mountbatten. So one of the great nephew of Victoria Eugenia is,
well, Prince Philip, late Prince Philip. It's the same family, just like the King of Greece as well, right? So it's all the same relatives.
They're all married. So they're all related. So the first royal client is the Queen of Spain, and goes from the lace stores to Lacloche. then follows all the cousin,
Exactly.
brother-in-law,
Convenient, right?
and that's how they got this very, very fancy clientele from the beginning, and they became very successful. Also, if you look at the brothers, they also married well, because one married a woman very connected with another jeweler who already had a lot of stores around the seaside resort of France, in Biarritz, in Deauville, in Le Touquet. So they could extend very fast in this kind of a fancy resort where the high society of the time was going on holidays.
So this is really where it's very blossoming. Now we enter the second volume, which is really the moment where Lacloche Frère would sign its signature pieces and really being one of the highlights of the Place Vendôme. And we really here go again chronologically to really showcase the different styles they embraced and the different commissions they were that they promoted. So the first style is a bit more conservative in a way.
Yes, it's Edwardian. So, I mean, before World War I, in the jewelry styles, there were like two main styles. It was the Art Nouveau and the Edwardian. I mean, the Lacloche touched a little bit the Art Nouveau, and you will show us later with a few examples. But their main style, and the style that the royalty wanted, was the Edwardian style or the garland style. Edwardian, because the queen of this style was the Queen Alexandra. And here you see her, and she was always wearing a lot of jewelry, and specifically well known for the chokers she was wearing, beautiful pieces. And the reason is that she had a little scar she wanted to hide, so it's why she was always wearing these chokers. The garland style is a very elegant style. It is a style which is, in fact, so you can also see that in the Belle Epoque architecture, which is very much influenced by Louis XVI style. So very classic, very symmetric. But what is interesting in this style is, and what makes it so light and what makes it so elegant, is the new use of platinum. So the jewelry before, they were all made in gold and silver, and they were much more like heavy, the silver tarnished. And suddenly comes this new material, which allows the workshop and the jeweler to be much more creative. And you see that in this early example of Lacloche pieces. This beautiful piece, you can exactly see the details and how well it was made. It was a new world which was opening to the jewelers and to the creation. Also, another piece which is very representative of the garland style, which is in the exhibition in Hong Kong and was in Paris, is this beautiful pendant. In fact, it's a pendant in rock crystal and amethyst, and on the other side, you have a very elegant watch. The watch is hidden because all the watches at the time were hidden because an elegant lady could not tell or read the time. She had if she was at a party and she had fun, she was staying late. If she was bored, she was leaving. No watch. So, in fact, the watch had been hidden. It's a good example. I think it's interesting on the early creation of Lacloche. In fact, they did a lot of watches. So they were already specialized from a very beginning in watches and jewelry.
So ladies' pendant watches, but then not just, right? They also did bespoke pieces, or actually commissioned and selected bespoke pieces for very special clients, right?
Absolutely. And here you have like two other examples. So on the left, a very, again, classical piece from this period with a mixed, interesting mix in material again, because it's a rock crystal and diamonds. But then on the right, you have this mysterious or strange box depicting the face of Caruso. So who was Caruso? So Caruso was a fantastic, very, very well-known opera singer, a tenor of the time. And it was really a celebrity by himself. You can compare him of Madonna or Lady Gaga of the time. People were queuing to listen to his music. People were queuing to have his autographs when he was leaving the opera. And where was he singing? Obviously, he was also singing at the Metropolitan Opera in Paris and in New York, but also in a lot of the seaside resort, because all this high society, when they were going to the seaside resort, they were shopping. It's why Lacloche opened the store there, but they were also gambling, and they were attending the opera. And they were attending so much the operas that sometimes I wonder if they were really listening to the music or not just gossiping or looking at each other jewelry. But here, I mean, for Caruso, they were listening to him because he was really a celebrity. And the special order is this extraordinary nécessaire, this box, with his face. And in one way, I mean, I think it's so contemporary. I mean, it's something which could be done today in
completely.
And at the same time, it's so specific.
And those pieces, he had many created, and they all bear this kind of moustache side, and they were fan objects that he would distribute to his admirers. So it's an interesting thing. Here comes the First World War, and what happened during the war. Again, archives about the Lacloche brother family are still not so easy to really get. Of course, we have this amazing book to help us, but there are still moments we don't know everything, which is normal. But what we know is that in 1917, and Nicolas, we come back to it, the family would really have a lot of business in London and being able to do a business from there, even though France is still the very kind of theater of the First World War. 1914, 1918 is the kind of official wartime, but after what we call the Roaring Twenties would take some time to take off again and to really have business develop back to what it used to be. And even though after the terrible Spanish flu, people, the survivors, go back to their life, they cannot live to the same standards as what they knew before. Meaning the corset has gone away. A lot of women have been working and stepping into their husbands, brothers, or really husbands' shoes, and they went for work. They don't have their ladies' maid anymore assisting, and they really, there is a sense and a need of something new. By 1925, the landmark for this era, the Art Deco exhibition would take place. The spirit of it is to revive the very 1900 World Fair spirit and kind of dynamic, but with new objects, something that would match modernity. People need electricity in their homes. It's about a telephone being wired. It's about gas installation. It's about new forms, new kind of comfort standards. So here comes the 1925 exhibition. And on those exhibitions, it's always the exhibitors would be actually applying. And there were 400 jewelers who applied for the French jewelry pavilion that you can see a picture of right now, but only 30 were selected. And among those 30s, you have Lacloche, you can see the name in the left corner, next to Cartier and Van Cleef & Arpels. And what is interesting, what happened in 1925 is the showcases for this pavilion were all looking the same in the very standards of what we know nowadays as a high jewelry showcase, with this electric lighting, with also these stands for jewels. Everything becomes a bit more homogenized and really more professional looking in a way. And this will really celebrate, this 1925 exhibition would actually celebrate this style, the Art Deco style. But regarding Lacloche, they would actually be famous for two things, having a Grand Prix, as you can see on the right-hand side, for their vanity boxes. So those boxes are really echoing the new needs of an Art Deco lady, meaning after the war, ladies with those beautiful boxes, they started to need new kind of compartment for new products. So they would want to get their compact with them as before the war and maybe a notebook, but the new additional cases would also contain maybe a lipstick holder, because now everyone is using lipstick and it's not just for the lower ranks of female society. And they would also certainly use them within a clutch to really go to party and go out and really live their life as a kind of independent women. And what is interesting, they also took on smoking. So a lot of those vanities or boxes would also be cigarette cases. And we will come back to that when we talk about the Lacloche style. But a lot of those boxes are now figuring in the exhibition just behind us. And why do we know that? Because what is so extraordinary in terms of historian archives is that Laurence Mouillefarine, who actually worked on the book, co-editing with Véronique, they found this amazing source, which is 2 albums that the Lacloche brother had edited as a catalogue of their collections for 1925 exhibition. And so, which means we know that there were 22 clocks and 63 jewels that would actually be showcased on that day. So we have about 100 exhibits. And thanks to those albums that were retrieved by Laurence and found back complete intact, we know what was there. And we know it was not just about cases and vanities. We know they had an amazing collection, unique of its kind, right?
Absolutely. And here you are the example of what you can find in this album, which is, as you say, it's extraordinary.
Beautiful.
Because if you look, I mean, you explained that very well in the exhibition. You have all the other jewelers, you have Cartier, you have Van Cleef and Arpels, but we have no idea what they did exhibit. We only know about the piece which did win a prize, but that's it, and a few photographs from the time. But here you know exactly all the pieces, and the collection is amazing. Many of them are here on view in Hong Kong. One of the highlights is this Jean de La Fontaine tales pieces. So on the left and on the right, you have the original drawings, and on the center, you have the brooch, which in its actual condition, which survives to us. And that's a beautiful piece. It's something which is very specific to Lacloche. So they did win a prize with that. But it's something no other Maison has done, to have like pieces inspired by this Jean de La Fontaine tales. So what is this Jean de La Fontaine? Jean de La Fontaine was a storyteller, more than a writer, a storyteller under Louis XIV. Very famous, still very famous in France. And he wrote this tale, which is The Crow and the Fox. And The Crow and the Fox is a tale that every kid in France or in French-speaking countries has to learn by heart at school. And that's one of his most famous stories. So what he was trying to do is like to explain to children and adults how to behave through tales, or how is in fact the true
morality, right?
Exactly. And I mean, he didn't invent these stories. These stories go back to the ancient Greece. And there was another storyteller at the time, writer, called Aesop, and had already written these stories. So most of the stories of Jean de La Fontaine are inspired by the one from Aesop. And the most famous, as I said, is The Crow and the Fox, which is here depicted. So what does this story tell us? It's the story of a fox who is very hungry and would like to eat a cheese. And here you see the cheese as a round diamond in the beak of the crow. How did he get this cheese? So to get this cheese, he starts to speak to the crow and tell him how beautiful is a bird. He's the king of the forest. And what his question is, we would like to know if his voice or his way of singing is as beautiful as his body and his feathers. And the crow, of course, wants to say, yes, I can sing beautifully. By saying yes, he opens his beak, and here comes down the cheese, which is eaten by the fox. I mean, when you look at these pieces, they are extraordinary. They are the example of a complete new style. I mean, we spoke of garland style. You explained what happened with World War I, with women starting to smoke, starting to put makeup, starting to cut their hair, starting to go out. It was a roaring 20s. I mean, also the world had changed. They were not an aristocracy in Russia, in Germany, or in Austria anymore. And the money has also changed. Before it was the aristocrat who had the money. Now there's a new category of very wealthy businessmen, and they're the ones who are pushing to its limit the luxury business.
So what is interesting is after these collections from 1925, trends would move on. So we saw very contrasted colors with a lot of ruby, emerald, diamonds, and platinum. What is happening by 1927, 1929, at the Galliera exhibition, the poster you can see on the right-hand side, jewelers start to work platinum highly. They go back to be able to work this material even more, and diamonds as well, in any shape and sizes. So a lot of baguette cut diamonds, brilliant cut diamonds, fancy cut diamonds. And what is interesting is the curator in 1929 found that this kind of new style was the great silence, the great white silence, because indeed colors start to vanish. And we see this kind of those pieces that are getting even more geometric, lending or bending towards abstraction. And for the cuff, you can see on the left-hand side, we really see also a kind of amazing subtle craftsmanship. So Lacloche signed some cuffs that are absolutely fascinating, beautiful, really kind of lace and extreme beautiful craftsmanship for those pieces that are still nowadays, actually we're able for some of them to be found thanks to Laurent's book. So here, those bracelets, I love the way Nicolas described them, because it's like you add on many together, right?
Yes, I mean, the bracelet on the left is one of my favorite pieces. You really have the impression when you look carefully at it that you are stacking like 5 bracelets next to each other. And when you look, it was the fashion of the day, in fact, to stack bracelets. The more, the better. Exactly. And the best example of that, I mean, it's not with high jewelry, but is what is wearing the lady in the slide, which is Nancy Cunard. So Nancy Cunard, she was a daughter of a very good English family, the Cunard Ocean Lines. Mother, Emerald Cunard, was a big society lady in London, entertaining everybody. And the daughter was very rebellious. She was a muse for a lot of artists in Paris, where she moved a later stage of her life. And here you see this amazing picture by Man Ray, where she's stacking all these bracelets around both wrists, and it's exactly the inspiration you can find back on this bracelet.
So what we see here with Lacloche is they reach customers beyond Europe in a way, and beyond the establishment they used to work with before the war. And this is very much where we really see this kind of extension to Hollywood and kind of important far away princes and important people. So here we go under the projectors, and for you we select a few highlights of the 30s.
Yes. We spoke at the beginning of the royal families of Europe, who were the first clients of Lacloche. And then now we go to society, because, as I said, a whole change in society after World War I. You saw on the advertisement that Lacloche was mentioned having a place in New York. It was not a store, it was more an office. But with this office, they had a direct connection and liaison with Hollywood, where they were able to lend a few pieces. I mean, like what we call today like product placement, which was very avant-garde to have already a product placement at this time. And one of the movie where you see a beautiful bracelet is called Girls About Town. It's a movie by George Cukor, not very well known today, and absolutely gorgeous necklace on the left, which is worn by an actress called Kay Francis. Also, we don't really remember her. She was a big star at the time. She was very shy with publicity, didn't give any interview. It's why her name is a little bit lost. But look at the necklace, and look at the necklace on the left, was in fact used in an advertisement. And if you look at this necklace, you can find kind of an Indian inspiration. I mean, one of the big Art Deco inspiration was, of course, India, with all the Maharaja having their stones remounted in the European style by the famous Maison of the Place Vendôme or Rue de la Paix. You have now drawings of a necklace which was done for the Maharani of Conch-Behar. Here you can see the rubies and the way it is. They are displayed, very elegant, very classical. The Maharani of Conch-Behar was a very fashionista Maharani. She was a big customer also of haute couture, and had a beautiful collection of shoes by Ferragamo, in fact. And she's also famous, if I can say, being the mother of the last Maharani of Jaipur. And this Maharani of Jaipur, you all know about her, because she was also as stylish as her mother, and she's the one who greeted Jackie Kennedy when she came on her way to India with her sister.
So very fancy aristocracy, princes, Hollywood stars, but still a few very important customers in Europe would actually commission amazing pieces. And this is where the tiara comes.
Absolutely. And that's one of the major pieces of Lacloche used in an advertisement. And it's also one of my favorite pieces. So when you look at this piece, I mean, obviously you are impressed by the size. And on the left, you have a very elegant lady wearing it. She's a Duchess of Westminster. So the Duchess of Westminster is the second wife of the Duke of Westminster. The Duke of Westminster is one of the richest men in England, and the family of Westminster are still very wealthy. They own most of the land in London. So in England, you have this strange system that you don't, even if you own an apartment or a house in England or in London, you don't own only own the house, and you have a land lease on the land for like normally like 100 years. And then after that, the whole come back to the original owner, one of these owners being the family of Westminster. So very, very wealthy family. It was a second marriage of the Duke. He had a first marriage, he got divorced, he had daughters from his first marriage, and he absolutely wanted a son, because you know, in England, it's very important to have a son to be able to transmit the title, the name, and the fortune. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and she never got pregnant. She was also from a very nice English aristocratic family. So to go back to the tiara, it's the style and the inspiration is like this kokoshnik, like a Russian style. It's like what the farmers in Russia were wearing in their hair to hold their hair together. And then it was inspired by the Russian aristocracy. And then from the Russian aristocracy, it went to the international aristocracy. And on the center of this tiara are like three important stones, and the two on the left and on the right are very famous diamonds called the Arcot diamonds. It's a pair of diamonds which was given to the English royal family, to Queen Charlotte, by the Nabab of Arcot in India. I mean, to get the good grace of the English government. But the son of Queen Charlotte, King George, didn't want to keep them and sold them to the Duke, the family of Westminster and the Duke of Westminster. The Duke of Westminster was a very, very colorful character. He was what the jet-setter English aristocrat by excellence, having a few castles, hunting, horse racing, having a beautiful yacht as well. And his nickname was Bender, and perhaps when I say this name, it will ring you a bell. And Bender, because he was, as I say, he had a lot of horse races, and they had a yellow stripe. It was the color of the house of Westminster, and Bender means yellow stripe in French. And he, as I said, the wedding, unfortunately, was not very successful. He would divorce and married a third wife. But when he was married here, he had a very famous mistress, and his mistress is Gabrielle Chanel. And that's a very important relationship in the life of Chanel, because obviously she had a lot of high life with him. She gave him this beautiful house in the south of France, La Pausa, but he also introduced her to the English style of living, but also the English style of dressing, with fabrics, with a tweed, and that inspired a lot. And when you look today at the Chanel tailleur, it's very much inspired by the tweed discovered through the Duke of Westminster.
But the thing is, this colorful fellow was in a way not so much of a gentleman, since he did not pay his bill to Lacloche brother, leaving a gap of 1.2 million ancient francs unpaid. And this set a problem that came on top of another thing. In 1931, Lacloche brothers would actually declare bankruptcy, not because of the Great Depression, not because of stock exchange problems, not even because this was unpaid. It was coming on top of it. There was one of the family member, actually the son of the first son I talked about, Leopold. This young man was living basically the life of his clients, and he gambled at Monte Carlo, at the casino, to the very extreme point that they really had to sell the stock and basically to declare bankruptcy, which was a huge scandal. So 1931, Lacloche Frères closes down. But what happened, and this is our third chapter coming, the junior generation, Jacques, would actually start on. So Jacques, remember, was born in 1900 or 1901, just after the death of his father, and his name Jacques after him. Very soon, at the age of 18, he would be actually trained by his uncles to join family business. In 1931, he's already a young kind of man, he's 30, and he decides to actually retrieve a few stock pieces from bankruptcy to be able to do pop-ups. He will start in Cannes and in south of France again. In 1936, he will find showcases and pop-ups in the French Riviera. And here are the pieces, an example of pieces he would promote. You can note we are now going from platinum to gold, yellow gold. 1936, 1938, European politics are not so good. One gets to militarize the society. Women are wearing more kind of uniform-like or suit-like kind of outfits, but they still want to remain feminine. So they wear those kind of chunky, bunky pieces made out of yellow gold. And for this piece, those cuffs, they were very, very actually famous because you can retrieve the very kind of gemstone part and change it according to your outfit. So with different fine gemstones or ornamental gemstones, turquoise, etc. So this goes for 1936, 1938. But what happens in 1938? Being quite successful, Jacques would be able to take his revenge. And this is when he would go to Place Vendôme and actually open number 8 Place Vendôme. Such a kind of wonderful revenge for this young man. And his shop would be actually in 2 floors, as tradition requires, but he would really be backed up or having backup by all those kind of important VIP, important people his family knew and that are still supporting the style, the eye, the kind of very kind of picking up, collecting kind of aspect. So Jacques is really an eye, and he will really do and have new commissions. Especially so during the Second World War, we don't have so much information about what happens, but we know that right away after the war, he's going back to business, supported by important princes again, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as what is interesting is what you explained very well. He started from south of France to Paris, which is a little bit the same story as his family. They started
the family recipe,
exactly the family recipe to go back to Paris. And he was much more like a confidential jeweler that his family, who had like other stores all around Europe and seaside resort. It was mostly south of France, Paris, but he had a lot of famous clients. And one of his famous special order was this absolutely very interesting brooch. You can see the sapphire and the movement around the sapphire. And this brooch was done as a gift, as a wedding gift from Prince Rainier to Grace Kelly when she became a princess of Monaco. Other pieces which are beautiful are these 2. And I mean, you really see these pieces. They are a little bit different in style from what the Lacloche family was doing. They are much more avant-garde. They are much more something that are unique pieces. And the one on the left is absolutely beautiful. It's a stunning piece where you have everything you want in a piece of jewelry. You have obviously the stones, and I love this mix of ruby, which are like the carved rubies. And he did 2 of these bracelets. We have one in the exhibition, which is with carved sapphires. And it's really this kind of Indian stole that at the time the Indian Maharaja didn't really want to use. And he does that in a beautiful way, setting them together. On the other side, the piece is also very specific. I mean, as you say, from the 40s, you can really feel the influence of the war about
machinery,
to happen in Europe.
But what is so interesting with Jacques Lacloche, he will cross the boundaries of genre in a way by going even further. And in 1954, he would actually create this perfume bottle and this perfume called Number 1, really challenging Number 5 Chanel Numéro 5. And what is interesting is he's also very playful in being audacious because, well, you can see the very shape of the perfume bottle. It's a bell because Lacloche in French means the bell. So it's like a really fun, it's a touch of humor. And he's the very first jeweler to start its kind of perfume line. Cartier would have started to do Cartier perfume brand kind of trademark depositing in 1938. But because of the Second World War, they could not go further. Number 5 Chanel was created in the 20s, but again, it's a fashion tailor lady doing perfume. It's not a jewelry maison or a jeweler creating perfume. And this is telling us about the curiosity and awareness of Jacques Lacloche, who would very quickly turn his back actually to jewels. So after 20 successful years or 30 successful years, it will, even in the 50s, it would start to exhibit paintings like avant-garde abstract paintings on the first floor of the 8th Place Vendôme. And eventually, in 1967, this is what you can see on the screen, he would become a design editor. And this is very much what he would be reminded or remembered about nowadays, to play a big role into design, especially, so his gallery, he becomes a gallerist. His gallery would be on Rue de Grenelle in Paris, where galleries should be. And what is interesting, he would really support Roger Talon to actually create this amazing staircase. Maybe you know about it. So it's like very minimalist. It looks like kind of the spine of an animal. It's extremely avant-garde and abstract in a way. So this is where really 1967, Jacques will stop being a jeweler and starts to be a gallerist. And this is when the archives, the story of the family gets in a way between brackets. And this explains why a lot of the family history is not so well known nowadays. Plus, there were other family members, and a lot of the book was actually written thanks to testimony of the last or the fourth generation, if I could say, Francis Lacloche. But a lot of other family members did not take the jewelry family business. So it stops in a way. And this is now when, as a kind of to wrap it up together, we start to give you a few kind of characteristic of could there be a Lacloche style? And we believe there are a few things you can go by to recognize Lacloche. And the first thing, we go back chronologically again to help you with the kind of scope, it would be the bestiary. A lot of purses and evening kind of purchase would actually be decorated as those two on the slide. On the left-hand side, this is leather owl, and on the right-hand side, the bat. Those are night owl kind of animals, depicting an Art Nouveau bestiary, meaning animals that are not the regal animals, but animals that really are showcasing the inconscient, the dream, or even the nightmare part of life, which is very Art Nouveau. So here again, we see how we are in 1905, 1910, Lacloche brothers, they crossed gender, they go to their neighbors that are corset makers, hat makers, or workshops for different textile and leather, and they knock on door and they ask for a specific design, and they go for something fashion, and not, it's yours, but it's also fashionable. And then during the war, there is an event that would really also pick and pin a very important style, right?
Yes, and that's one of my favorite pieces as well, and one of the most famous pieces by Lacloche and style is this lace. And when you see something like that, you can absolutely recognize from the right that it's a Lacloche piece. And it's with rose. I mean, rose was flowers was very dear to the Lacloche family, and you see that in a lot of jewelry. And it's really like laces on platinum with diamonds. You can see with these details the refinement of the piece. But where did they take their inspiration from this bracelet? You can see on the left there is an egg, but obviously the egg is not by Lacloche, it's by Fabergé. I don't need to tell you who Fabergé is. This amazing jewelers of the Russian jewelers, providers of the imperial family. He is most famous for his eggs. The Tsar of Russia, Nicolas II, was giving an egg as Easter present to his wife and another one to his mother every year. But also the mother of the Tsar, the Empress Dagmar, she was a sister of Queen Alexandra, the one we saw at the beginning of the conversation, of England. Very close. And they were two sisters. When they love each other, they send each other a gift. So she was always sending her a lot of Fabergé, and it's also why the actual Queen of England has an amazing and fabulous collection of Fabergé at Buckingham Palace. And Fabergé became so successful in England that he decided to open a store. But with the Russian Revolution in 1917, he has to close the store. And who bought it over is Lacloche. So they not only bought the store, so that's the address which we saw in the advertisement in London, but they also bought a stock. And today you still can find a few Fabergé pieces in their original boxes where it's written Lacloche. And with working with this stock from Fabergé, it's where Lacloche took the inspiration for this fabulous bracelet.
But it's not just Russia and the petit point technique, it's also Egypt with the discoveries in 1922, right?
Absolutely. A major influence in the design, jewelry design during World War I and World War II is the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. Something which was very fascinating for everybody. It was the top of the news and is still fascinating today. I mean, every kid would like to make a discovery similar. And this discovery had a lot of influence of the decorative arts. I mean, it's not the first time that Egypt had a lot of influence of decorative art. I mean, there was like 3 waves. The first one was Napoleon I when he invaded Egypt. This is the Egyptomania in Paris. The second with Napoleon III with the opening of the Canal of Suez, and this one with the discovery of the tomb. So all the jewelers were influenced different ways. If you think of Cartier, the Egyptian jewelry revival by Cartier is more like integrating original artifacts in the jewelry. And here it's more like reproducing the fresco of the Valley of the King in Luxor. And you can see how delicate it is, how specific it is.
So this is another influence, but then we really must acknowledge the influence of Asia that would really go around all the vanity boxes in the Art Deco style. In this slide, you can see 3 boxes. So again, they are really showing some lacquer, which is the new kind of trendy material for the Art Deco. And you can also see the use of jade and a really kind of inlay of jade pieces. So this, those vanity cases by Lacloche, they are usually slightly smaller than the ones from other kind of high jewelry houses. And again, a lot of them would be actually to be cigarette cases, just like the piece on the right-hand side. And you see the color combination, very black, red, and green. But what is interesting, if we look into those into details, as you can see here, there are a lot of, this looks like the doors of the imperial forbidden city. There is a lot of connections to actually landmarks of Chinese culture, and not just in terms of architecture, but here, maybe a thing that could let you know this is a Lacloche box would be jade and calligraphy, and the fact that those 2 objects are combined together. So some jade highlights on the piece, could be nephrite or jadeite jade. But what is very interesting is, I'm sure you can notice this kind of character and this kind of calligraph you see on the 3 pieces. This is really something that the Lacloche brothers would use, which means they knew a workman who was good enough to reproduce the character, which is a very auspicious character in China for longevity, and able to reproduce it so that even a Chinese person can actually recognize it. So we don't know who the workshop was, or who in the workshop was so gifted with it, but it's interesting. This is one of the signature that could really help to identify Lacloche. And then, just as the kind of cherry on the cake, the craftsmanship with platinum, and those sceneries, those narratives on bracelet could be another way to see Lacloche, right?
Absolutely, and this bracelet is fabulous for that. You spoke about the Chinese influence, very important in the Art Deco. Lacloche also used the Japanese influence, which is more subtle. I mean, obviously, Japan was well known in Europe. The Japanese were known in Europe through the wood prints from Hokusai, Hiroshige. And when you look at these wood prints and you look at the delicacy of the bracelet, you can absolutely see the reproduction on it. I mean, look at the different use of stones, the in fact carved onyx to do a little bit of relief, as well as a little door of the bridge, and the sun or the setting sun on the water with these rubies. So that's specific and beautiful pieces. I mean, here you can wear it around your wrist, or you can look at it flat. It's 2 different ways to absolutely analyze and admire this masterpiece.
So now, as a conclusion, what has been done through this Lacloche revival exhibition, academic work, and our conversation today is also to showcase the workmanship, the craftsmen behind the scene. There is not just the family members and the signature, but the so many golden hands that are behind and that are still very key person today. So in the book and in the catalog, we actually really can find about 15 workshops, which stories would be actually listed and marks and maker marks. So this is what we wanted to highlight with this exhibition. And among those very many craftsmen, there are the box makers, but there are also the designers with those pieces, the gouaches, that were found in the album I talked to you about for 1925. So this pendant, for instance, is a beautiful piece, very absolutely landmark. It's actually huge. You can see it's featuring moonstones, carved moonstones, diamonds, onyx, sapphire, and jade. This is actually quite big. It's in the exhibition. And this is one of the pieces that could have been identified in a way, thanks to this work and thanks to those conversation and kind of curiosity exchange. So this is something we want to stress and acknowledge: workshop, people behind the scene, and among which gouache. And in Paris, the L'École in Paris actually just launched a fabulous exhibition, Designing Jewels, as you can see the kind of poster on the right-hand side. Again, showcasing gouache not just by Lacloche, but really all that kind of archiving material that is so important to keep, store, curate, and study, so those kind of creations would not go in a way forgotten forever, right?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So I think we are at the end of our hour and conversation, but we are still very happy to be able to answer your actually questions. So let me look.
Let's see what we have.
Let's see the kind of harvest of today. I just, okay, so we have, our dear moderators selected 3 questions for us. Let's hope we can answer them, because not always. Were the Lacloche workshops in Paris at the Place Vendôme or outside of Paris? Do we know how many staff they employed? Well, many of their workshops were in Paris. We talk about Verger Frères, we talk about Strauss-Allard-Lameguière, we talk about Langlois up until 1932, where Langlois got bought by Van Cleef and Arpels. For enamel, though, it might be a bit away from Paris. Sometimes it's also Geneva or some kind of clock watchmaker centers that could be involved. But yes, for as far as we know, a lot of the workshops, and all of it is in the fabulous, again, book and the exhibition catalog, they are based in Paris, but not on Place Vendôme, strictly speaking. They could also be in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, Rue de Châteaudun, so in the right bank, but on the east side of Paris, in the kind of the more, how would you say, laboring classes, kind of where you have more space actually available to establish workshops. I hope I answered.
Yeah, no, perfect.
The number 2 question: where is the Duchess of Westminster tiara today?
That's a sad story. In fact, it's often happen when you have jewelry pieces with important stone. It's when we were looking at the 2 pieces inspired by Jean de La Fontaine. There was a brooch and there was a bracelet. And the bracelet, we don't know where it is, but it doesn't have important stone. It has such a beautiful design that I still hope it must be somewhere in a safe, in a vault, and one day it will reappear.
Maybe someone knows behind the camera, right?
Exactly. But it will never be the case, unfortunately, for the tiara of the Duchess of Westminster. So the Duke of Westminster remarried, so he went to a 3rd wife, still didn't have any children, but the 3rd wife was seen a lot wearing the tiara, and you can even see a picture of her wearing it during the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. But after, when the Duke of Westminster passed away, he had a daughter, but he didn't have any son. So the whole estate and the title passed to distant cousin, and they had a lot of inheritance tax to pay. And one of the ways to pay tax was to auction the jewelry, and they did auction the tiara. And the tiara was sold, the diamonds were dismantled. I mean, we still know where the Arcot's diamonds are today, but unfortunately nothing about the tiara.
So the tiara was chipped into pieces, as it happens for so many jewels.
Yeah.
Hence the gouache and the preparatory drawing that are reviving it. 3rd question. I noticed that Lacloche used to use mystery set, and the Egyptian collection reminds me a lot of Van Cleef and Arpels ones. So how Van Cleef and Arpels influenced and was influenced by Lacloche?
That's a very good question as well, and unfortunately, I don't think we can answer that, because when we spoke about the style of Van Cleef & Arpels and Lacloche, and we kind of show the best example going from the Art Nouveau to the Art Deco, they are styled when we don't know who started it first. And it's true that the Egyptian revival from Lacloche and Van Cleef & Arpels are very similar. And we don't know who started first, or if they had the idea at the same time. It was in the showcase of the two stores on Place Vendôme and Rue de la Paix. Unfortunately, we were unable to see it. I mean, when you look at the bracelet, you could easily see the difference, because the Van Cleef & Arpels Egyptian revival bracelet, also influenced by the fresco of the Valley of the King tombs, will be all around the bracelet. With Lacloche, they have kind of a plaque with diamond in between, and that's very specific to Lacloche. I never seen a Van Cleef & Arpels doing a similar piece. But I mean, who started it first, that I'm unfortunately unable to say.
Only archives could tell, actually. So only if you have archives telling you, I don't know, drawing 1921. But even though, remember, at that time, both Maison and all of them, they don't have in-house workers for all the different craftsmanship. So they might have gone to the same designer, or maybe to the same workshop specialized in that kind of objects. Or maybe it was the same drawer who actually traveled to Egypt, came back with some drawings and proposed, and not on exclusivity term, so it could actually be seen in many Maisons. So it's a mystery, but I'm sure, and we are confident in it, because we saw it in the past 2 years, more knowledge will pop out with this kind of work and conversation. So experts will actually come, and we are very happy that this is already happening. I hope for the mystery sets, strictly speaking, it's really a technique specific to Van Cleef & Arpels, so it's a bit different. Well, now thank you to all of you. It's always so cheerful to know that everyone behind the camera, so many of you are here to discover this long forgotten family. Now we're going to go for the festive season, but after, in the next year, in 2022, our colleagues in France are also giving a very interesting talk, men's rings. So after all about those female, we are going for male jewelry. So Victor Gastou and our colleague Ghislain would actually give you a 1-hour conversation on this amazing rings and men rings collection. So let's hope you can be present again, 26th and 27th of January next year. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.